All right, it's recording. So here we go. 8G, you need to know what nominal and effective rates are. Now, in my last session, I talked about nominal rates being the rate per annum. So you can see here, per annum means per year. So here it says interest rate is the interest rate given per annum. That's what nominal rates are. Now, we use a nominal interest rate when converting into a compound interest rate when putting into a recurrence relation. Sounds very confusing. All they're trying to say is, if you had $1,000 and it was invested at 8% interest per annum, what does that mean? Just means that you chose to give $1,000 to, say, a bank, you're investing it, and what they gave you is a rate per year. Okay, so they're saying that 8%, if you still have $1,000 in your bank account, at the end of that year, they'll take 8% of 1,000 and add on top. Now, what you can see here, if that's what we call a nominal rate, that 8% per annum, which is the rate that you should be getting, what's interesting is here, and I'm going to show you on your CAS. What's interesting is the nominal rate, we said it's 8% of what you invested. Now, if you invested $1,000, you would be finding 8% of 1,000. So 8% we know is 8 out of 100. 8 divided by 100, which is 0.08. You're essentially saying, let's find out what 0.08 times $1,000 is. That tells you it's $80. So that means by the end of that year, okay, after that full year, you should be getting 8% of 1,000, which means you get an extra $80. You should get a total of $1,080. So your interest that you gain is $80 there. Okay, and that was a result of finding 8% of 1,000. Or alternatively, on your CAS, you could have done 1.08, which means you're adding on 8% times 1,000. That gives you 1,080, right? Now, what's interesting, and this is what effective rates is. If you didn't understand what effective rates was yesterday, all effective rate is it's going to be affected by the compounding. How many times do you compound changes that interest. The more you compound, the more interest there is. That's the idea of effective rates. That's what it is. So you can see here, they say the rate of interest has to do with the fact that if you compound the interest, you will earn more interest than quoted in the nominal interest rate. So what does that mean? In this example in the table, can you see how it says nominal interest rate after 1 year, you should be getting 1,080, right? But if I compound it quarterly, means that every quarter, so every 3 months, I am going to put an interest, I'm going to find the compound or find the interest of that current amount. So you can see here, they're finding the compounding amount is then 1,020. Now, how did they get 1,020? If they compound it quarterly, in 1 year, how many quarterlies are there? How many quarterlies are there? 4. There are 4 quarterlies in 1 year. So what that means is your 8% interest per annum is no longer 8%. It is now 8%. Shh, listening. Thank you. It's now 8% divided by 4 because every quarter you want to know how much that percent is going to end up being in that year. So 8% divided by 4 is 2%. So what this means is it's 2% per quarterly. 2% per quarterly. This is how they got 1,020, because that's what they're doing. On your CAS, this is what they're doing. They're saying you start off with 1,000 and then you're multiplying it by 1.02. That gives you 1,020. If you want to find the next year, again, it's another 2%. So another 2%, I press enter again, gives me $1,040. Now what's interesting is after 4 years, you can see now, not 4 years, so 4 quarterlies, which makes a month, 1 year. So end of that year, can you see the difference between the two? This is what effective rate is. See, nominal rate, this is what they promised you. So if you were doing a loan, right? They say it's 8% per annum. You would have done 8% of what you borrow. This is what you would have calculated. But what's interesting is if you compound it differently, if you're not compounding every year, or if you compound quarterly, or you compound monthly, or you compound weekly, that's going to make a difference, because the more you compound, the more interest you'll come out of that. So this is only $1,000, but you can imagine if you borrowed up to $1 million to buy a house, that's going to be a lot of money. That's right now $1,082.43. But if you look at it, I'm only compounding quarterly. I'm not even compounding monthly at the moment. And that means you're already paying an extra $2.43, even though the time frame is exactly the same. So in 1 year, for compounding makes a difference to a small scale. You're paying an extra $2.43, even though they quoted you at 8% per annum, this is how much you're technically owing them at 8% per annum. But what's changing is how many times you compound it. It means how many times you actually work out the percentage. If you work out, the more you work out, the more the interest will increase. That's why we call it the effective rate. So here, how much is that extra, that interest that they added on top of $1,000? That's $82.43 out of the $1,000 you borrowed. So the percentage, when you convert it to a percentage, it's 8.24% overall. Whereas over here, that's exactly what they quoted you. They quoted you 8%. So it should be 8%, but it's not. The effective rate is 8.24. This is why when you're investing in a bank account, they'll tell you whether it's compounded weekly, monthly, daily, and then you look at the interest. You see, you want to be able to compare the effective rate, because you need to know, does it end up being, after 1 year, does it end up being better than my interest to go with this bank, which is clearly 8% only, and they do it annually, or should I be going with this one where they compound at 2%, which sounds much less, but they do it quarterly. 2% quarterly is bad, because by the end of that year, I'm actually paying $2.43 more than I should. And that's only because I'm borrowing $1,000. If you borrow $500,000, you can imagine how much that interest will make a difference. It only takes a few percentages to make that difference. Okay? So, what am I going to show you today? In your notes, there is this formula or notation for you to do. You can do all this calculation by hand. So I've shown you how to do it by hand, but you can do it using a notation or syntax. So opening up your CAS, this is what you can do. You can do EFF for effective rate. This is if you want to calculate the nominal rate of an interest, given that you had an effective rate, or you can calculate the effective rate given that you had a nominal interest. So in our case, I want to find the effective rate. If I know the nominal rate is 8% per annum, and I know there are 4 quarterlies, okay, so right here it says 8 for nominal rate. The next number, comma, tells you the number of times you compound it. So since I'm compounding quarterly, I know there are 4 quarterlies. So here, I would write 4, and you can see they've got 8.24 as your percent. So you don't actually have to do all this calculation here. You don't have to do all of this step to get to 8.24. You can do it in one go. So hence that formula is useful to use as part of your CAS. You can do EFF 8,4, and that allows you to find the effective rate if you know the nominal rate and you know how many times you compound in a year. Okay? And the reverse is also true. So if you're given an effective rate and you want to know the nominal rate, you can also do the same where you do nom, and then you say effective rate is 8.243216, and you know that you're compounding quarterly. That tells you your nominal rate is 8%. Okay, so you'll find that syntax on your CAS will be much